The dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light, each a tiny world drifting through the cavernous quiet of Hangar 7. The woman pushed her cart with an economy of motion that bespoke a long acquaintance with physical labor. Her gray janitorial jumpsuit was immaculate, a stark contrast to the grease-stained concrete floor she was meticulously erasing with her mop. Her name, according to the plastic clip on her breast pocket, was Alara. To the swaggering flight crews and preoccupied mechanics of Blackwood Air Force Base, she was less than a name. She was a function, a shadow that tidied up the messes left by important men and their important machines. She was invisible, and that seemed to suit her. Her face was a landscape of quiet history, etched with lines that didn't speak of age so much as of distance traveled, of pressures withstood. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. They swept the hangar not with the weary boredom of a custodian, but with the practiced, systematic scan of a professional assessing a field of operations. She noted the improper torque on a fuel line cover, the subtle wear on the landing gear of an F-35, the careless placement of a tool chest that could become a hazard in an emergency scramble. Her hands, though gloved, were calloused beneath the thin latex, the skin tough from a life of holding things far more complex than a mop handle. She moved through the cathedral of military aviation, a ghost among gods of steel and thunder. The centerpiece of the hangar, the base's crown jewel, was the X-47 Spectre. It was more than a jet, it was a statement. A sleek, bat-winged marvel of composite materials and classified technology, it sat brooding in its designated bay, a predator at rest. Alara's path always brought her near it, and her pace would slow almost imperceptibly. She saw not just the angled perfection of its design, but the soul within the wiring, the temperamental heart of its fusion core engine. She could almost hear it breathing, a low, electronic hum that was inaudible to everyone else. Today, the hangar was thick with an undercurrent of tension. The Spectre program was behind schedule, and the pressure from the Pentagon was a palpable force, rolling down the chain of command like a shockwave. Colonel Vance, the base commander, stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He was a man carved from institutional granite, a product of a system that valued polished boots and rigid adherence to protocol. He was watching the Spectre, and his gaze was one of proprietary frustration. His career was tethered to this aircraft. As Alara worked her way closer, her mop moving in silent, overlapping strokes, Vance's eyes flicked to her. He didn't see a person. He saw a discrepancy, a civilian element in his sterile, military world. He turned to Lieutenant Croft, a young pilot whose arrogance was as polished as the eagle on his cap. Croft was the designated lead for the Spectre's operational trials, and the delays were a personal affront to his ambition. Croft, Vance said, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable ring of command. Have a word with the contractors. I want the custodial staff kept to the designated walkways. These are not museum pieces for them to gawk at. Croft, eager to please, nodded sharply. Yes, sir. He strode over to Alara, his boots clicking with self-importance on the concrete. He didn't address her directly at first, instead choosing to speak as if she were a piece of equipment that needed adjusting. Ma'am, we need to keep this area clear. The Spectre is a sensitive piece of hardware. We can't have cleaning chemicals or excess moisture near the intakes. Alara stopped her work. She slowly straightened, her eyes meeting his. They were calm, unblinking, holding a depth that momentarily unsettled him. There was no flicker of subservience, no trace of intimidation. There was only a quiet, unnerving stillness. She looked from his face to the Spectre, her gaze lingering on the delicate seam where the wing met the fuselage. The seals on the portside hydraulic manifold are weeping, she said. Her voice was quiet, raspy from disuse, but clear. A chlorinated solvent will degrade the polymer. You'll have a catastrophic failure at high G. Croft stared at her. The technical specificity of her statement was so jarring, so out of place coming from the janitor, that he couldn't immediately process it. He mistook it for nonsense, for the ramblings of someone who had overheard technical jargon and was repeating it poorly. A smirk touched his lips. We have the best engineers in the world looking after this aircraft, ma'am. I think they know how to handle it. Just stick to the floors." He gestured dismissively with his hand, a shooing motion one might use on a stray animal. Ilara's expression didn't change. She held his gaze for a second longer before giving a slow, deliberate nod. She turned, pulling her cart with her, and moved away, resuming her silent, methodical work. Croft watched her go, a flicker of uncertainty warring with his ingrained arrogance. He glanced at the portside wing, then shook his head, dismissing the encounter. She was a janitor. What could she possibly know? Her days settled into a rhythm defined by the routines of the base. The pre-dawn roar of engines, the midday shift changes, the quiet hum of the hangars at night. Ilara moved through it all, a silent observer. Her work was a cover, a perfect camouflage that allowed her access to the heart of the operation without drawing a single suspicious glance. She was the woman who emptied the trash cans in the mission planning rooms, who wiped down the consoles in the control tower, who swept the metal shavings from the floor of the machine shop. While she worked, she listened. She absorbed the casual conversations, the frustrated arguments, the technical debates. She learned the weaknesses of the base not from intelligence reports, but from the gossip of overworked airmen and the complaints of cynical engineers. She saw the vulnerabilities in their systems, the blind spots in their security, the hubris that was their greatest enemy. She paid special attention to the Spectre and its team. She watched the mechanics, led by a grizzled chief petty officer named Marcus, as they struggled with the jet's esoteric systems. They were good men, skilled and dedicated, but they were working from manuals that were deliberately incomplete, redacted by the manufacturer to protect proprietary secrets. They were flying blind. She watched Croft and the other pilots in the simulators, saw their bravado and their fear. They were trained to fly, but they didn't understand the machine they were strapped into. They treated it like a tool, not a partner. To them, the Spectre was a weapon. To Ilara, it was a living thing, and it was in pain. During her breaks, she would sit in the small, windowless janitor's closet, the scent of ammonia and bleach a constant companion. Sometimes, she would unconsciously rub her left wrist. Just below the cuff of her gray jumpsuit was the edge of a tattoo, a single, black feather. If the sleeve were to ride up further, it would reveal a bird of prey, its wings folded tight, its head bowed as if in slumber. It was a symbol from another life, a ghost of a past she had buried under years of silence. The bird was a wraith, and it was her. One afternoon, while cleaning the observation deck overlooking Hangar 7, she watched as Marcus and his team tried to troubleshoot a persistent glitch in the Spectre's primary avionics bus. They had the access panel open, a nest of fiber optic cables and glowing conduits exposed to the air. They followed the checklist on their tablets, their movements becoming increasingly frustrated. Ilara could see their mistake from 50 feet away. They were trying to isolate the fault by rebooting the main computer, but the glitch wasn't in the software. It was a hardware issue, a hairline fracture in a plasma conduit, a flaw that would only manifest under the specific energy load of a full system diagnostic. They were treating the symptom, not the disease. She saw Marcus shake his head and slam the panel shut. "It's no good," he said to his subordinate. "The diagnostic comes back clean every time. But the moment we try to spool the NAV matrix, it crashes." Ilara turned back to her work, a faint sigh escaping her lips. They were getting closer to the truth, but they were still worlds away. The pressure intensified. The glitch in the avionics bus mutated, cascading through the Spectre's interconnected systems. What began as a minor nuisance became a full-blown crisis. The jet's neural interface, the revolutionary system that allowed the pilot to control the aircraft with thought alone, was now completely unresponsive. The entire Spectre fleet, all 3 multi-billion-dollar prototypes, was grounded. The hangar, once a place of focused activity, became a pressure cooker of anxiety. Engineers from the manufacturer, a civilian contractor called Cyberdyne Aeronautics, were flown in on an emergency transport. They were young, brilliant, and utterly baffled. They huddled around laptops displaying complex schematics that even they didn't fully comprehend, speaking in a rapid-fire language of acronyms and code. Colonel Vance's face seemed to have aged a decade in a week. He stalked the hangar, his presence a constant, brooding reminder of the stakes. The Pentagon called 3 times a day. A congressional oversight committee was threatening hearings. Lieutenant Croft was the most agitated of all. His moment of glory was slipping through his fingers. He paced the perimeter of the Spectre's bay like a caged wolf, his hands clenching and unclenching. "This is a joke," he snarled to anyone who would listen. "The most advanced fighter jet in history, and it's been taken down by a ghost in the machine. It's pathetic." The mechanics, under Marcus, were exhausted. They worked in 12-hour shifts, fueled by stale coffee and dwindling hope. The hangar floor was littered with discarded parts, diagnostic cables, and empty energy drink cans. The air smelled of burnt ozone and desperation. Through it all, Alara moved with her quiet, unflappable grace. She emptied the overflowing trash bins, mopped up coffee spills, and cleaned the grime from the observation windows. She was a point of serene normality in a world of spiraling chaos. The engineers barely noticed her. To the pilots, she was invisible. But Marcus, the old chief, started to watch her. He noticed she never seemed rushed, never seemed bothered by the tension. He saw the way her eyes would linger on the open access panels of the Spectre, a look of profound, almost sorrowful, understanding in their depths. He remembered the strange comment she had made to Croft weeks ago, the warning about the hydraulic seals. He had checked them himself afterward, quietly, and found she was right. There was a minuscule, almost undetectable leak, exactly where she had said it would be. He had replaced the seal and filed the report, omitting its source. He didn't understand it, but he hadn't forgotten it. He was starting to see that she wasn't just a janitor. He just didn't know what she was. Late one night, the breaking point finally arrived. After a 16-hour shift, the lead Cyberdyne engineer, a man named Kessler, threw his diagnostic tablet onto a workbench with a clatter of plastic on steel. "I'm done," he announced, his voice ragged with fatigue. "It's impossible. The core programming is locked. The system won't let us access the root command structure. It's like it's actively fighting us," Marcus sighed, rubbing his grease-blackened hands over his tired face. "So that's it. We just tell the colonel we have a fleet of the most expensive paperweights in history." The small team of engineers and mechanics began to pack up their tools, their shoulders slumped in defeat. The hangar slowly emptied, leaving only the oppressive silence and the hulking shape of the dormant Spectre. Lieutenant Croft had returned to retrieve a data slate he had left behind, his face a mask of cold fury. He stood glaring at the jet as if his stare alone could intimidate it into working. A single security guard stood by the main door, paying more attention to his phone than his surroundings. And there was Alara, finishing her final sweep of the bay. She pushed her cart past the defeated group, her movements as steady and deliberate as ever. She paused near the workbench where Kessler had thrown his tablet. The screen was still active, displaying a cascade of error codes. Marcus, too tired to move, sat on a stool, his head in his hands. He watched her, a strange premonition taking hold. Alara stopped her cart. She looked at the exhausted chief, then at the silent jet. She reached out and picked up a small, specialized tool from the bench, a resonance key, used for calibrating delicate energy conduits. It was a tool few people on the base were even cleared to handle. Croft saw her and opened his mouth to deliver a sharp rebuke, but the word died in his throat. There was something in her posture, a sudden shift from passive observer to active participant, that silenced him. Without a word, without any wasted motion, Alara walked to the Spectre. She stepped onto the maintenance platform, her movements sure-footed and certain. She didn't go to the main avionics panel that everyone had been focused on. Instead, she ran her hand along the underside of the cockpit, her fingers searching for something. They found it, a tiny, almost invisible seam in the composite skin. With a precise application of pressure, a small, unmarked panel clicked open, revealing a port that wasn't on any of the schematics. She inserted the resonance key. Then, her fingers moved to a small, integrated keypad next to the port. She didn't look at the keys. Her hands flew across the surface with blinding speed, a blur of motion. It wasn't typing, it was a conversation conducted in a language of pure code. On the main diagnostic screen that Kessler had abandoned, the scrolling red error code stopped. A single line of green text appeared, // neural _lattice recalibrated. Wraith protocol engaged. A low, melodious hum filled the hangar as the Spectre's internal systems powered up, not with the jarring flicker of a reboot, but with the smooth, organic grace of a creature waking from sleep. The cockpit lights glowed a steady, healthy blue. Ilara removed the key, closed the hidden panel, and placed the tool neatly back on the workbench. She looked at Marcus and Croft, who were staring, mouths agape, their faces a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. She gave them a simple, neutral nod. Then she took hold of her cart and walked out of the hangar, leaving the sound of a perfectly running machine in her wake. The silence she left behind was more profound than the noise that had preceded it. Marcus was the first to move. He scrambled up the platform, his exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He ran a full system diagnostic. Every single metric was green. The neural interface was not just online, its response time was 3 nanoseconds faster than factory specifications. It was performing better than it ever had. "How?" he whispered, staring at the console. "How is that possible?" Croft was speechless. He replayed the scene in his mind, the janitor, the hidden panel, the impossible speed of her fingers. The certainty she had radiated. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a guess. It was absolute, unquestionable expertise. "Colonel Vance needs to see this," Croft said, his voice strained. He found Vance in his office, poring over personnel files, a grim look on his face. Croft didn't bother with salutes or protocols. "Sir, you need to come to Hangar 7. Now, when Vance saw the jet, humming contentedly, all systems nominal, his expression of stern authority dissolved into pure astonishment. Marcus and Croft recounted what they had seen, their words tumbling over each other in their haste. "She just walked up and fixed it," Marcus said, shaking his head. "She used a port that we didn't even know existed." Vance stared at the jet, then at the two men. "The janitor?" he asked, the words feeling absurd on his tongue. "The woman?" "Yes, sir," Croft confirmed. "We need to know who she is." Vance's aide, a young captain, was already at a terminal. "Running her file now, sir. Name is Ilara Corvin. Age 52. Previous employment listed as custodial services for a series of civilian corporations. Nothing else. Social Security number was issued 10 years ago. Before that, there's nothing. It's like she didn't exist." "That's a sanitized file," Vance murmured, his mind racing. A deep cover. It was then that Croft remembered the detail he had dismissed. "Sir, the tattoo. On her wrist. I saw it when her sleeve rode up. It was a bird of some kind, black." Marcus's eyes widened. "A wraith," he said, the word barely a whisper. "The old stories the test pilots tell. About the Black Ops X program from 20 years ago. The ghost pilot who flew the prototypes, the one they called Wraith, they said she could meld with the machine." Vance looked from Marcus to the jet and back again. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. A legend, a ghost story, was mopping his floors. He had dismissed her. He had ordered her to stay away from the very machine she clearly understood better than its own creators. The thought sent a chill down his spine. The institutional arrogance he embodied had made him blind. A new crisis erupted less than 48 hours later. Confident the issue was resolved, Vance had authorized a high-altitude test flight. Croft was in the cockpit, eager to finally push the Spectre to its limits. He broke the sound barrier over the Nevada desert, the jet performing flawlessly. Then, multiple alarms screamed through the cockpit. "Mayday, mayday," Croft's voice crackled over the radio, tight with strain. "Major structural integrity failure. The stealth coating is delaminating at the wing roots. The airframe is shaking itself apart." In the control tower, the mood plunged from elation to sheer panic. Telemetry data flooded the screens, confirming Croft's report. The friction from the supersonic airflow was peeling the radar-absorbent material off the jet's skin, causing catastrophic drag and instability. "Eject, Croft, eject," Vance ordered. "Negative, sir. The eject system is non-responsive. The canopy release is jammed." The room fell into a horrified silence. Croft was trapped in a disintegrating aircraft, 10 miles above the Earth. The flight engineers frantically tried to find a solution, but the situation was unprecedented. The manual had no procedure for this. "Bring him down," one engineer suggested. "Slow him down, reduce the stress on the airframe." "No," another countered. "If he drops below Mach 1, the altered aerodynamics will send him into an unrecoverable flat spin. He's dead either way." Vance stood frozen, the lives of his pilot and his multi-billion-dollar program flashing before his eyes. He had only one option, a choice that went against every regulation in the book. "Find her," he barked, his voice raw. "Find the janitor. Get her here." Now, 2 airmen found Alara in the mess hall, calmly eating a bowl of soup. They explained the situation in frantic, broken sentences. She listened without expression, put down her spoon, and followed them at a brisk walk. When she entered the control tower, a wave of silence washed over the room. All eyes turned to her. The chaos ceased, replaced by a desperate, collective hope. An operator handed her a headset. She put it on, her movements calm and deliberate. She ignored the frantic data on the screens and closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then she spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "Lieutenant Croft," she said, her tone level and devoid of panic. "This is ground control." "Acknowledge, I read you," Croft grunted, his breathing heavy. "The stick is barely responsive." "Forget the stick," Alara commanded. "Listen to my voice. I need you to disengage the primary thrust vectoring and trigger the secondary coolant bleed. Channel it to the leading edge of the wings. Now." "Croft, that's insane," an engineer yelled. "That will flash freeze the control surfaces." Vance silenced him with a glare. "Do it, Lieutenant," he ordered. Croft, trusting the strange calm in her voice over the screaming alarms, followed the instruction. The violent shaking lessened almost immediately. "It's working," he gasped. For the next 15 minutes, Alara talked him down from the sky. She had him perform a series of maneuvers that were not in any flight manual, a delicate and counterintuitive ballet of bleeding energy, redirecting plasma, and using the damaged airframe's flaws against itself. She was not flying the plane from the ground, she was communing with it, soothing it, guiding it home. She was treating the machine not as a tool, but as a wounded partner. The room watched, mesmerized. She was in complete control. As the Spectre, battered but stable, began its final approach, a priority message alert flashed on Colonel Vance's personal console. It was from a secure server at the Pentagon, flagged with the highest level of security clearance. The sender was General Matthews, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Vance opened it. The message was brief and direct. "Colonel Vance. It has come to my attention that Dr. Alara Corvin is on your base. Her cover designation is Janitorial Services, Level 1. You will refer to her by her former call sign, Wraith. Dr. Corvin was the chief designer of the X-Series neural interface and the original test pilot for the Spectre prototype, designation X-47A. Her entire program was black-shelved 20 years ago due to internal politics. Her records were sealed under the Sentinel Protocol. She is a national asset of the highest value. The fact that she is on your base is not a coincidence. She goes where her creations go. Give her anything she asks for. Follow her instructions without question. That is not a suggestion. That is a direct order. Acknowledge. Vance read the message twice, his blood running cold. Dr. Elara Corvin. The creator. The original pilot. The ghost in the machine was the machine's mother. He looked over at the woman in the janitor's jumpsuit who was calmly guiding his best pilot back to Earth. The sheer scale of his own ignorance, of the system's arrogance, struck him like a physical blow. He had a living legend on his base, and he had ordered her to stay away from the mops and buckets. He keyed a command, and the general's message was projected onto the main tactical screen for the entire control room to see. A wave of hushed gasps and stunned whispers filled the room. Every person in the tower, the controllers, the engineers, the support staff, turned from the screen to look at Elara with a new, profound understanding. The quiet janitor was gone. In her place stood Wraith, a figure of myth made real. They were not just watching a skilled operator, they were witnessing the return of a queen to her kingdom. The awe in the room was a palpable thing, a heavy silence of reverence and shock. Elara seemed oblivious to it all, her focus entirely on the task at hand. Easy now, Croft, she said into the headset, her voice still a calm anchor in the storm. Let her settle. Don't fight her. Just guide her home. The Spectre's wheels touched the runway with a gentle chirp, a landing so smooth it defied the shredded state of the aircraft. Emergency crews swarmed the jet as the canopy finally hissed open. Lieutenant Croft unstrapped himself, his movements slow and shaky. He climbed down the ladder, ignoring the medics who rushed toward him. He stripped off his helmet and walked away from the jet, his eyes fixed on the distant control tower. His stride was unsteady at first, then gained a rigid purpose. He bypassed the entire welcoming committee, including a visibly relieved Colonel Vance. He marched directly into the operations building and took the stairs to the control tower two at a time. The door swung open and he strode in, his flight suit soaked in sweat, his face pale but resolute. The room was still thick with the aftershock of the revelation. Elara had just taken off her headset, placing it carefully on the console. She turned as Croft approached. He stopped directly in front of her. The entire room held its breath, expecting words of thanks, a desperate question, something to break the tension. Croft said nothing. He simply stood straight, brought his heels together with an audible click, and rendered the sharpest, most precise salute he had ever executed in his life. It was a gesture of profound, unconditional respect, an acknowledgement of a skill and authority that transcended rank. It was the salute of a soldier to a true commander. Seeing his gesture, a young airman near the door straightened her back and saluted. Then another. And another. In a silent, spreading wave, every uniformed person in the room, from the lowest-ranking operator to the hardened flight controllers, rose to their feet and saluted the woman in the janitor's jumpsuit. Finally, Colonel Vance, his face etched with a humility he had never known, came to attention and raised his hand to his brow. He was not saluting a subordinate or a civilian consultant. He was saluting a legend. Elara looked at Croft, her winter sky eyes holding his for a long moment. A flicker of something ancient and weary passed through them, the memory of other flights, other dangers, other lives. She then scanned the room, taking in the sea of salutes. There was no smile, no sign of triumph on her face. She simply gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then, with the same quiet dignity with which she pushed her cleaning cart, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a profound and unbroken silence. The next morning, she was gone. Her locker in the janitorial closet was empty. Her name was wiped from the base's personnel roster, leaving behind the same kind of clean, untraceable void from which she had appeared. It was as if Elara Corvin, the janitor, had never existed. But the presence of Wraith lingered, a permanent change in the atmosphere of the base. The institutional arrogance had been scoured away, replaced by a quiet, watchful humility. Young pilots spoke in hushed tones about the ghost who had saved one of their own, no longer a fantastical story but a foundational lesson. Colonel Vance stood on the tarmac in the early morning light, watching the sunrise glint off the canopy of the repaired X-47 Spectre. Marcus and his crew were already at work, but their movements were different now. They treated the aircraft with a newfound reverence, touching its skin with the care of a devotee tending a sacred relic. Vance walked up to the cockpit and looked at the small, hidden access panel below the fuselage. He could still see the faint, ghostly smudges of her fingerprints on the composite skin. They were the only physical evidence she had left behind. He thought about the general's message. She goes where her creations go, he finally understood. She wasn't in hiding. She was a guardian, a silent shepherd watching over her flock of complex, temperamental machines. She didn't need recognition or rank. Her reward was in the work itself, in the perfect hum of a well-tended engine, in the safe return of a pilot from the edge of oblivion. Her strength was not in what she said, but in what she did. It was not in demanding respect, but in earning it so completely that it was given freely, in awed silence. The Spectre sat on the flight line, its systems purring with a perfection no manual could achieve. It was a monument of steel and code, but it was also a testament to the unseen, underestimated woman who was its creator, its pilot and its soul. The legend of Wraith was no longer a ghost story at Blackwood Air Force Base. It was the gospel.